This is the 7th and last day of the May 92 7-day retreat at Springwater. I will read from 4 authors, which I do almost all the time on the 7th day. It's giving all of us, including myself, a break from the words I use, the questions that have come up here. But the books are not read to bring in authority. The authors are Huang Po, who lived 1,000 years ago, Krishnamurti, who died a few years ago, Vimala Thakur, who lives in India, and Mary Oliver, who is an American poet. These readings can be helpful, if you will, if our listening and looking while reading and listening meet at the source. Since these are all copyrighted materials, the tape, we're taping each talk, but the tape will not be for sale. The first book is called The Zen Teaching of Huang Po, translated by John Blofeld and written down by his disciple Pe Su, who was a Buddhist scholar and also the governor of the province where Huang Po had his monastery and taught. Well, it was not his monastery. He was asked to teach there by the governor. At that time, it's interesting. Emperors and governors were very interested in these teachings and allocated grants for them, funds. The master, I don't read to represent or to present Huang Po here. I have abbreviated sentences, left out paragraphs or words, so that it clarifies what all we've been talking about and looking at during the past 7 days. The master said to me, all the Buddhas and all sentient beings are nothing but one mind, beside which nothing exists. This mind, which is without beginning, is unborn and indestructible. It is not green nor yellow and has neither form nor appearance. It does not belong to the categories of things which exist or do not exist, nor can it be thought of in terms of young or old. It is neither long nor short, big nor small, for it transcends all limits, all measures, names, traces, and comparisons. It is that which you see before you. Begin to reason about it, and you at once fall into error. It is like the boundless void, which cannot be fathomed or measured. The one mind alone is the Buddha, and there is no distinction between the Buddha and sentient beings, but that sentient beings are attached to forms and so seek externally for Buddhahood. Buddhahood means enlightenment, perfection, wholeness. By their very seeking they lose it, for that is using mind to grasp mind. Even though they do their utmost for a full eon, they will not be able to attain to it. People do not know that if they put a stop to conceptual thought and forget their anxiety, the Buddha will appear before them. For this mind is the Buddha, and the Buddha is all living beings. It is not the less for being manifested in ordinary beings, nor is it greater for being manifested in the Buddhas. Following is a dialogue between Pe Su and Huang Po, which took place about 1,000 years ago. Questioner: what is the way? And how must it be followed? Huang Po: what sort of thing do you suppose the way to be, that you should wish to follow it? Pe Su: what instructions have the masters everywhere given for meditation practice and the study of the truth? Huang Po: words used to attract the dull of wit are not to be relied on. Questioner: if those teachings were meant for the dull-witted, I have yet to hear what truth has been taught to those of really high capacity. Huang Po: if they are really people of high capacity, where could they find people to follow? If they seek from within themselves, they will find nothing tangible. How much less can they find a teaching worthy of their attention elsewhere? Do not look to what is called the true teaching by preachers, for what sort of true teaching could that be? Pe Su: if that is so, should we not seek for anything at all? Huang Po: by conceding this, you would save yourself a lot of mental effort. Questioner: but in this way everything would be eliminated. There cannot just be nothing. Huang Po: who called it nothing? Who was this fellow? But you wanted to seek for something. Pe Su: since there's no need to seek, why do you also say that not everything is eliminated? Huang Po: not to seek is to rest tranquil. Who told you to eliminate anything? Look at the void in front of your eyes, which means look. Forget about the void, just look. How can you produce it or eliminate it? How can you produce or eliminate the hills, the trees, the meadows, the deer, the clouds, sky, and the sun, or moon, or yourself, or all the people around you? Questioner: do you mean that we should not form concepts as human beings normally do? Huang Po: I have not prevented you. But concepts are related to the senses, and when feeling takes place and concepts are formed, wisdom is shut out. Pe Su: then should we avoid any feeling in relation to the Dharma or to the true teaching? Huangpu, where no feeling arises, who can say that you're right? Huangpu, why do you speak as though I was mistaken in all the questions I've asked your reverence? Huangpu, you're a man who doesn't understand what is said to him, who's not listening, we could say, not listening deeply and impersonally, taking things personally, isn't he? But Huangpu is not talking personally. So Huangpu says, you're a man who doesn't understand what is said to him. What is all this about being mistaken? Questioner, up to now you have refuted everything which has been said. You have done nothing to point out the truth to us. Huangpu, in the truth there is no confusion, but you produce confusion by such questions. What sort of truth can you go seeking for? Questioner, since the confusion arises from my questions, what will your reverence's answer be? Huangpu, observe things as they are and don't pay attention to other people. He doesn't mean ignore them, but don't be influenced by what their teachings or sayings are. When there's attention, we also pay attention to other people, of course. But do we examine what they're saying for ourselves deeply? Or do we just follow because it sounds good? The person has a lot of charisma or whatever. There are some people, says Huangpu, just like mad dogs barking at everything that moves, even barking when the wind stirs among the grass and leaves. Once I put this question to the Master: how many of the 400 or 500 persons gathered here on this mountain have fully understood your reverence's teaching? The Master answered, their number cannot be known. Why? Because this way is through mind awakening. How can it be conveyed in words? Speech only produces some effect when it falls on the uninstructed ears of children. Though others may talk of the way of the Buddhas as something to be reached by various pious practices and scripture study, you must have nothing to do with such ideas. A perception sudden as blinking that subject and object are one will lead to a deeply mysterious, wordless understanding. And by this understanding, you awake to the truth. When you happen upon someone who has no understanding, you must claim to know nothing. He may be delighted by his discovery of some way to enlightenment, yet if you allow yourselves to be persuaded by him, you will experience no delight at all, but suffer both sorrow and disappointment. What have such thoughts as his to do with the study of truth? Even if you do obtain from him some trifling method, it will only be a thought-constructed thing having nothing to do with truth. Truth is something never lost to you in moments of delusion, nor is it gained at the moment of enlightenment. It depends on nothing and is attached to nothing. It is all-pervading, spotless beauty. It is the self-existent and uncreated absolute. Absolute meaning dependent on nothing. Ah, it is a jewel beyond all price. The last selection is, but how can we prevent ourselves from falling into the error of making distinctions between this and that? Actually, that is not the error. This mind distinguishes between a bird call and a dog bark. No problem with that. It's when judgments and prejudices and remembrances, liking, disliking, wanting and fearing and hating, when that comes in, the problems are there. Wangpo, by realizing, how can we prevent ourselves from falling into error? Wangpo, by realizing that though you eat the whole day through, no single grain has passed your lips, and that a day's journey has not taken you a single step forward. We could interpret this eating the whole day through. You read and read and read and hear lectures and tapes. And what have you got? And a day's journey has not taken you a single step forward because there's no place to go. Everything is here. Without time, unless we think of, what do I have to do today, tomorrow? What will happen this weekend? Oh my God. Also, by uniformly abstaining from such notions as self and other, do not permit the events of your daily lives to bind you, but do not withdraw yourselves from them. Doesn't mean never leave a job, you have to stick it out. It doesn't mean that. Although he may have meant that. But not withdraw. When you're there, then what are we withdrawing from? Where to? Isn't it all here in the head? Avoid the error of thinking in terms of past, present, and future. The past has gone. The present is a fleeting moment, and the future has not yet come. When you practice meditation, sit in the proper position, in which 1,000 years later we include easy chairs and sofas, or lying down, relaxed. Not all the time, as is needed, as the body tells us. Sit in the proper position, stay perfectly tranquil. How are we going to do that? Stay perfectly tranquil. In the midst of turmoil, can there be staying or sitting or lying or walking in the eye of the tornado, in the midst of turmoil? A toehold on silence. And do not permit the least movement of your minds to disturb you, which means not to be disturbed by disturbance which comes so quickly. Is that possible? He says, this alone is what is called liberation. Be diligent, be diligent. This is a book of excerpts from Krishnamurti's talks and writings, compiled for distribution at the annual gathering of the Krishnamurti Foundation India in 1990. These few selections are under the heading, Self-knowledge comes into being when we are aware. Self-knowledge comes into being when we are aware. The first selection is from a talk in Madras in 1959. I do not know if any of you have ever seriously gone into yourselves with complete willingness, with wholeheartedness, with joy, without any sense of compulsion, and have tried to discover what you are. Merely to say I am this or I am that is immature, it has no meaning. To explore, to discover, there must be joy, there must be enthusiasm, vitality, especially when going into this complex thing called the mind. But most of us explore either out of despair or to find something which will give us nourishment, which will give us stability and assurance of continuity. Real inquiry must be without all of these things. One inquires just to find out what is actually taking place. A questioner asks, what is this self-knowledge of which you speak, and how can I acquire it? Okay. You have extraordinary ideas about self-knowledge. That to have self-knowledge you must practice, you must meditate, you must do all kinds of things. It's very simple, sir. The first step is the last step in self-knowledge. The beginning is the end. The first step is what matters. Because self-knowledge is not something you can learn from another. No one can teach you self-knowledge. You have to find out for yourself. It must be your own discovery, and that discovery is not something tremendous or fantastic. It is very simple. After all, to know yourself is to watch your behavior, your words, what you do in your everyday relationships. That is all. Begin with that, and you will see how extraordinarily difficult it is to be aware. Just to watch the manner of your behavior, the words you use to your servant, to your boss, the attitude you have with regard to people, to ideas and to things. Just watch your thoughts, your motives, in the mirror of relationship, and you will see that the moment you watch, you want to correct. You say, this is good, that is bad, I must do this and I mustn't do that. When you see yourself in the mirror of relationship, your approach is one of condemnation or justification. Therefore, you distort what you see. Whereas if you simply observe in that mirror your attitude with regard to people, to ideas, and to things, if you see the fact without judgment, without condemnation or acceptance, then you will find that that very perception has its own action. That is the beginning of self-knowledge. To watch yourself, to observe what you do, what you think, what your motives and incentives are, and yet not condemn or justify, is an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. Because your whole culture is based on condemnation, judgment, and evaluation. You have been brought up to do this and not that. But if you can look in the mirror of relationship without creating the opposite, then you will find that there's no end to self-knowledge. Like looking without creating the opposite means if I see something I think is good, then I think the opposite is bad. Or if I see something that I think is bad, I think I should be good. We can observe that, how the brain is conditioned in thinking and evaluating in opposites. Yes or no? Good or bad? Right or wrong? You see, the inquiry into self-knowledge is an outward movement which later turns inward. First we look at the stars, and then we look within ourselves. In the same way we look for reality, for God, for security, happiness in the objective world. And when it is not found there, we turn inward. This search for the inner God, for the higher self, or what you will, completely ceases through self-knowledge. And when the mind becomes very quiet, not through discipline, but just through understanding, through watching, through being aware of itself every minute without choice. Don't say I must be beware every minute, because that is just another manifestation of our foolishness when we want to get somewhere, when we want to arrive at a particular state. What matters is to be aware of yourself and to keep on being aware without accumulating. Because the moment you accumulate, from that center you judge. You get that? The moment you accumulate what you know about yourself and you repeat it and go over it and rehearse it, there is a center from which you judge. The self-center is the accumulation of the past. Somebody says it. Now let's find out whether this is so or not by watching. Self-knowledge is not a process of accumulation. It is a process of discovery from moment to moment in relationship. It's a book that was recently given to me. It is called Being and Becoming by Vimala Thakur. Vimala was born in India in her 50s, I believe. She met with Krishnamurti, his teachings, his person, and this affected her life. It changed her life. And after that she became she didn't call herself teacher, she called herself an inquirer, traveling all over the world. This country, Europe, Asia. Right now she is just teaching, that is giving talks and meetings in India. This is the very, very end of a session with a class in 1988-89, or 87-88, I don't know. These books are usually not very much edited, it's just transcription. It doesn't read as smoothly maybe. One has to be very alert to listen. I'll try to listen, to read slowly. There's a very nice excerpt from one of her talks on the back, which I will read too. The angle from which I would request you to look at life with me is something fascinating and fantastic. The process of becoming, the movement of emerging as an expression, as a manifestation, does not convert the wholeness into a creator. The wholeness and the manifestations of wholeness are not divided. She calls human beings a manifestation of wholeness. Not becoming somebody important, she doesn't mean that becoming, but emerging out of no form into a human being And that she calls is emerging into wholeness, not as a creator. There is no creator and creation. It remains nothingness and nobodiness. It remains the grand emptiness, all-pervading space. If the nothingness and nobodiness, the wholeness, the dynamism and the virginity of life does not get violated by the process of becoming, by the movement of emergence, by the movement of expression, is it possible for us to learn to enter into the process of becoming without our psychological virginity getting violated, without our nothingness and nobodiness getting affected at all? That is the crux of the whole spiritual inquiry. I've never read this aloud to anyone, so we'll see how it works. The wholeness of cosmic life is related to the manyness of material objects, as the waters of the ocean are related to the ripples, the waves, the storms taking place on the breast of oceans. There is a relatedness without dependency. There is a mutuality, a reciprocity. The emergence of manyness, the emergence of forms and objects enriches the wholeness. It does not detract anything from the organic wholeness. No matter how many forms appear, there is an undivided whole, is what she's saying. Not only that they are not parts of the wholeness as you have parts of motor cars, but they are the wholeness themselves. Every human being is a tiny wholeness, demonstrating the cosmic holiness, representing the cosmic wholeness. A blade of grass, a leaf of a tree, a drop of water, they contain the quality of that wholeness and creativity. If this is clear, let us come back to ourselves. From the cosmic life around us, let us come back to the cosmic life within us. We are not outside the wholeness of life. We are not apart from it or separate from it. We are within the wholeness, sharing the organic dynamic nature, sharing the inexhaustibility of creativity. Born in a society, we have a responsibility of relating to man-made structures. I say human-made structures, physically and intellectually. Born in a society, we have responsibility of relating to human-made structures, physically and intellectually. We have the responsibility to relate to the self-created, self-sustained life around us on the one hand, and the responsibility to relate to the human-made world and the human beings around us on the other hand. In the human society, there seem to be two ways of functioning, two ways of relating. One is functional relationship. You acquire knowledge and you accept the responsibility to utilize that knowledge and function as a teacher, as a lawyer, a doctor. This is a functional responsibility, and you have to operate in the human-made structures with others who are functioning in the same way, acquiring knowledge, utilizing that knowledge efficiently, competently. Otherwise, the computers will take over. You are now coexisting with parallel brains, whether it is calculators, computers, or robots. So, with precision, with competency, with accuracy, you have to function. That is one responsibility. In this functional relationship, whatever responsibility you take over, you have to play the game as they play the game of cricket or tennis. There are rules and regulations. You cannot say, I have learned how to play cricket, so I will play as I like. Your likes and dislikes are irrelevant to the rules and regulations of the game. The efficiency depends on your inner freedom from your likes and dislikes. It's a beautiful statement, isn't it? We think our freedom is to do what I like. And she says, your likes and dislikes are irrelevant to the rules of the game, taken that they're not outlandishly violent rules. The efficiency depends on your inner freedom from your likes and dislikes. You may not like the persons who are members of your team, but when you're on the playing ground, your likes and dislikes have no relevance, no significance, no meaning. Doesn't mean one can't work on it after hours. It will spoil the game while you're playing it. As you play the games and go by the rules and regulations, you move in the structures of society as an engineer or a lawyer and play the game by the rules and regulations. Functional responsibility has to be discharged without a sense of identification, leading you to attachment and then obsession. We were talking about this in one meeting last night. Someone learning a profession after sort of roaming around, finding out lots of things, going to spiritual centers, and now learning a profession and realizing having to clothe in a certain way and present oneself in a certain way, and the ambition arising. And it was that person's feeling that without ambition, he wouldn't be good at the new profession, that the ambition is necessary, and we were questioning it. Ambition here meaning this self-image being the driving dynamo. I have to be the best, people have to think I'm the best, and the attachment to this image. Then our performance isn't up to full capacity, because part of the energy goes into serving the self-image. So there's a tremendous question, can one perform fully and well without becoming identified with what one is doing as an image, and the image gaining importance, crowding out everything else? Functional responsibility has to be discharged without a sense of identification, leading you to attachment and then obsession. Every identification, this is me, this is what identification means, this is me, and the thought about myself, the image. Every identification creates a stiffness and rigidity. You build compartments within your wholeness and exclusively get attached to them. Either attached to them or revolted or aversion to them. It happens too. You do not remain the whole. Identification stimulates intolerance, and then you cannot tolerate differences of opinion. You cannot tolerate a different approach than your own. You become dogmatic. If your functional role requires you to be assertive, you have to learn to exercise assertion if necessary in relationship, without psychologically becoming assertive. There's a very neat, subtle distinction, isn't it? If your functional role requires you to be assertive, you have to learn to exercise assertion if necessary in relationship, without psychologically becoming assertive. There's becoming an addiction. To feel good, to feel powerful, to feel that one is somebody. This is all observable. That's the beautiful thing. And in the observation, it can filter out We're talking about an alternative way of living, an alternative dynamics of human relationships. This is what we're waiting for. The human race is on the threshold of a new culture enriched by natural and social sciences. As identification is a sickness that creates psychological complications, there is another sickness in the human psyche today, that of constant comparison with others. Earn the money. Why does not the matter end there? This unverbalized sense of jealousy, sense of comparison, is cooking up suffering for yourself. You cook it up in your memory. So while discharging the functional responsibility, it is very necessary for the health, for the wholeness, not to have a sense of comparison and jealousy. Please do see this. If you see and feel that truthfulness, decency, straightforwardness, non-stealing, non-cheating is the essence of humanness, why does one not feel fulfilled by living truthfully? If there is comparison and jealousy, you can never feel fulfilled. If the discharging of functional responsibility does not get complicated by psychological attitudes of identification or comparison or jealousy, life can become very simple. Since the last 2 centuries, the human race has been anxious to change the motivations behind ownership and possession of property, has been anxious to end aggression, exploitation, and violence. That has been the concern of socialists and communists alike. Please do see this, because in a total transformation, you cannot exclude the social content of your life. Whether it was Marx or Engels, for they felt if the individual is not allowed to amass property, and if the state takes over, then the individual psyche would be free of the sickness of ownership of property and profit-making for oneself. Amassing wealth, leaving the inheritance for the progeny, which becomes the source of further exploitation, all that would come to an end, and there would be a new attitude towards money and property. Much human blood has been shed in these experiments. Not because they were cruel people, they were also inquirers as you and me. They replaced the sense of individual ownership by state ownership, but that did not work because the state has to be managed, and the state has to be managed by managers. You create a new managerial class. The same ownership, property, power in the name of the state, not in the name of family. All the privileges in the name of being an officer, being a politician, being a prime minister. Do you see? The need is for changing the quality of the content of consciousness. And the need is for changing the dynamics of relationships. That has not happened, and we are learning from it. The challenge is for revolutionizing the functional relationships and the way that they are discharged. The need is for utilizing the knowledge efficiently, with care and concern, with a sense of responsibility, without psychological involvement. Now you come to the other realm of relationships, which could be called the psychological. I am born as a child into some family. So one has to play the role of the father, the mother, the son, the daughter, the brother, the sister, and so forth. I am born in the midst of a network of relationships, and they have their own patterns sanctioned by society. The child must behave this way, and so this talk was given in India. The child must behave this way, husband that way, the wife this way, sanctioned by society, standardized by society, standardized by religions, traditions, conventions. and you're expected to live up to the standards, up to the expectations of family. How does one retain the aloneness? She's talked before about aloneness. We often talk about it. Being alone, not being separated or segregated or isolated, but all one, but not dependent. How does one retain the aloneness while moving in this network of relationships? All of these questions came up during this retreat, didn't they? The functional relationship was for 8 hours a day, the job. And here it is for 24 hours a day, living under the same roof, sharing the same table, and so forth. How does one retain the aloneness while moving in this 24-hour-a-day relationship? Family or group of staff people. In this field of relationship, is it possible that one unfolds one's being and does not use the movement of relationship acquisitively? That one unfolds one's being but does not use the movement of relationship acquisitively? Can relationship be a movement for manifesting what I am, unfolding what I am, rather than the opportunity to acquire something, to bargain and to buy something? You cannot buy acceptability. You want to buy a sense of belonging. Therefore, acquisition, attachment, expectation, suffering has been the way of human relationship through untold centuries. To relate has meant to own. As you possess a piece of cloth, do you want to possess another human being because he's your husband or she's your wife? Can there be ownership between human beings? The challenge that is facing us today is whether the human race is willing to explore an alternative way of relationship. That question came right up in this retreat, and we looked into it. It's awake, it's buzzing, coming up here, there, everywhere. Can there be an alternative way of relationship? To find a way of relating where you are unfolding the content of your being and where you're grateful to the other person that they respond to your needs, your sexual needs, your sensual needs, and so forth. Not creating a pattern of behavior for them. To be grateful to each other for the opportunity to unfold whilst moving through relationship. To relate non-acquisitively. To be together, to share life, to share responsibilities without trying to own and possess one another. The other person cannot live for you. You have to live for yourself, and the act of relationship is the movement of life. As the being is fulfilled in the emergence of forms, do you feel fulfilled when you unfold yourself as a newly married wife, as an adult mother, as an old woman or man? Do you feel fulfilled by that unfoldment? If the unfoldment releases a sense of fulfillment, then you would not expect anything in return for that unfoldment. Aloneness is non-acquisitiveness. Aloneness is absence of expectations. Aloneness is the movement of unfoldment, manifesting, expressing unconditionally in a non-bargaining attitude, expressing unconditionally, spontaneously, not with all kinds of ideas. How am I going to talk to him or her? Unfolding. In a non-bargaining attitude, not, if I do this, then will you do this to me? Or, I expect that you do the same. And if you don't, I'm hurt, disappointed, frustrated, angry. Do you see do you see non-acquisitiveness and non-possessiveness are going to be the criteria for the new human culture that is going to emerge out of the synthesis of science and spirituality? Non-identification, functionally, and non-acquisitiveness, non-possessiveness psychologically. Then you can be alone, and you can relate with others without creating a sense of dependency in them or in yourself. I want to read all of this because I still want to get to Mary. Oh, I can't. It's too late. Maybe one poem. Have you had enough? No. Shall we go over? Read a poem. All right. I'll read 2 poems. Maybe 3. This one is called Singapore. In Singapore, in the airport, a darkness was ripped from my eyes. In the women's restroom, one compartment stood open. A woman knelt there washing something in the white bowl. Disgust argued in my stomach, and I felt in my pocket for my ticket. A poem should always have birds in it, kingfishers say, with their bold eyes and gaudy wings. Rivers are pleasant, and of course, trees. A waterfall, or if that's not possible, a fountain rising and falling. A person wants to stand in a happy place in a poem. When the woman turned, I could not answer her face. Her beauty and her embarrassment struggled together, and neither could win. She smiled and I smiled. What kind of nonsense is this? Everybody needs a job. Yes, a person wants to stand in a happy place in a poem. But first we must watch her as she stares down at her labor, which is dull enough. She is washing the tops of the airport ashtrays, as big as hubcaps, with a blue rag. Her small hands turn the metal, scrubbing and rinsing. She does not work slowly nor quickly, but like a river. Her dark hair is like the wing of a bird. I don't doubt for a moment that she loves her life. And I want her to rise up from the crust and the slop and fly down to the river. This probably won't happen, but maybe it will. If the world were only pain and logic, who would want it? Of course it isn't. Neither do I mean anything miraculous, but only the light that can shine out of a life. I mean, the way she unfolded and refolded the blue cloth, the way her smile was only for my sake. I mean, the way this poem is filled with trees and birds. Maybe that says it all. We will end here for today.